This is the Harmonic Motion podcast, a place where you, dear listener, can join with automotive aftermarket professionals as they delve into and discuss the matters which matter.
So, welcome to this episode of the Harmonic Motion podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back Jay Wheatley from Absolutely Automotive, and we're choosing the subject matter of service advisors and their role in the automotive garage business. And Jay and I are going to chew this subject, kick it round a bit, and hopefully come up with some interesting discussion points and thoughts that you've either had and done nothing about, or you haven't had and are going to have to do something about. So, welcome back, Jay. It's delightful. Thanks for giving up your time and appearing back. We didn't scar you with your first appearance here, so I'm delighted in a way that you've been able to feel that you could come back and have a chat again with me.
Yeah, it's good to be here, James. Thanks for the invite. And a subject very close to my heart, as I'm sure you know, and some other people do know me anyway. So yeah, it's good to be here, and let's see what we end up chatting about, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's become a bit of a hot topic, and I know it's one that's dear to your heart, which is one of the reasons why, I felt you were the ideal person to talk around this subject matter. That, there's a lot of noise in the market about technician scarcity and, filling the vacancy in technician roles and the impact that's having on the business. And I think often maybe an overlooked role more so is that of service advisor. And there's a whole piece about, in the olden days, very often, whether it's the right or the wrong thing, ancient technicians that no longer were able to mechanic wherever you sit on the promotion or demotion scale, made their way to the front desk and were then, shoehorned into a service advisor role. And I think now, as the technicians have actually left the industry, there isn't that, if you call it progression or regression, there isn't that route now to filling the front office with retired technicians, because they've sort of left the industry, they've left the trade, and there's a big gap. And that in itself has left, I suppose, garages exposed with, okay, so how do we find, what do we need for this role? If we can't find technicians, who do we need? What do we need? And really, I was really keen to have a conversation really about the service advisor role, because I know it's dear to your heart. And, people are saying, and I think you'll probably agree, that it is one of the toughest jobs in automotive for all sorts of reasons, which we'll cover. Not physically tough, but maybe mentally tough and demanding. It probably has a very interesting mix of skills that are required. And I was keen to probably kick off with thinking about, from your perspective, what would you see really the aspects of the role that are quite important, and where that becomes difficult if we consider the as we've just described it, the typical recruitment or feed stock for service advisors.
Yeah, I think where it becomes difficult for service advisors, or where we should be looking for the better type of person, rather the better type of person to fit the role, would be people definitely with empathy and not too much sympathy. There's a difference there, and you very often find that service advisors want to help the customer in a way that doesn't benefit the business, and that's quite often a difficult position to be in. So they get enforced by the customer into a repair, for instance, that we actually don't want to make. Mainly because of costs, and also I found that service advisors find that a difficult situation as well. The cost of the repair is quite surprising to them, depending on their background and where they came from. So they're faced with a 4-figure repair, and they think, well, the customer's never going to afford that. And before they've even delivered that to the customer, they're already thinking, well, they're going to say no. So they're already on the back foot, and how can I make this cheaper? And it's sort of changed in that mindset, which is why I've always had a view of maybe people who are not from the motor trade, because when you take a technician, you take somebody from a workshop. It's not that they're going to be a bad service advisor, but they've never really paid a full price to fix their car, and that's that also becomes a bit of a problem. So they think, there's a cheaper way around that. I could, or I could repair that. I don't need to replace that part. The business model, however, is to replace the part with a new one, a good one, make it a good repair, have no warranty issues. So they're already thinking, we could do half of that repair. Then you end up with a situation where the technician who's fixing it is going, hang on a minute, this wasn't the repair I wanted to do to make it a good repair. Whereas if you get somebody from outside of the industry, they don't actually know any different. So by employing somebody from outside of the industry with the customer service skills that you require, and then educating them on the other bits, which I know that some garages find very difficult, because what they want somebody who knows a car and will patch up the rest of it. In actual fact, I've always found it to be the reverse, and understanding the technical side, or understanding the team building within the garage, is actually easier to teach and easier to manage than actually the customer service skills of maybe being empathetic to a customer. I understand what situation you're in, but it's not my responsibility to fix your car without saying it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It does indeed. And I think there's probably some skill sets from you. It's a really good point, isn't it? We often have the same discussion here in terms of my technical experience with technicians diagnosing vehicles. That becomes a huge issue, that they almost think, well, I wouldn't spend that on my car. And they're in that mindset of they're running cars on a very low budget because they can do it themselves. And it becomes an issue when we think about charging for diagnostics from a small one-man band or two-man band where they're still quite close to fixing it. Making that transition into actually what you're supposed to be doing is proposing a robust repair for a retail customer. And I hear myself going, remember, this isn't if you were buying it, this is you selling it. So it's very different. The perspective is you have to warrant it. It has to be reliable. And, latterly, I suppose we can dive into we're doing some work with ECUs, and we have to be very careful to warn them that this is not really a retail repair in some cases, because you can't have a warranty and it takes a little bit, it's quite difficult for them to change their perspective and have that empathy, but also not have overt sympathy. So it's a really good, you've hit upon something really, really quite good there. And I suppose, again, in industry or out from industry in the recruitment process, I guess if you're delivering really bad news on a regular basis, like, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, your pet has died, actually presenting an invoice for 4,000 quid for a transmission failure, is on terms of where bad news scale sits, that isn't really bad news. And there probably is some really strong background from non-trade, incomers that we could leverage and use and would help the business meet its objectives. So that's a really, really good point.
Yeah, I employed a guy who came from a lighting company. But they did a lot of West End lighting shows. And so he had great customer service skills. He could talk to people on the phone. He could talk to people just generally, because he was always setting up contracts. He didn't know one end of a car to another, really, not technically anyway. He'd know more than someone else, a customer would. But presenting somebody with £1,000, £1,500 bill was it didn't bat an eyelid, because as far as he was concerned, well, that's the price of the job. And this was always the price of the job, whatever he sold. So, he wasn't, and he actually really wanted to make the transformation to the motor industry. And it was an absolute pleasure training him, because he really wanted to learn, but he had those core skills that I didn't even have to think about. I just had to deal with the other skills, which sometimes seem a bit daunting. But there are ways to teach that, but as I said, it's just having those core ones that you don't have to think about. Customers absolutely loved him because he knew how to talk to them and had that empathy. But at the end of the day, this is your car. We have to remember in the motor trade. I know a lot of garages do know this, but from a front of house point of view, that we're dealing constantly, most of the time, unless you're remapping or something like that, you're dealing with forced purchases. Nobody wakes up on on the last day of the month and think, do you know what? I've got 54 quid left. I'm going to go and get my car MOT'd. Nobody says that because, it's the best thing I can do today. So you have to think about it. They never actually want to be stood in front of you, and they never want to buy that product. And that service advisor that you're trying to employ has to realise that and has to make it the best experience they can and take money from that person when they don't actually want to give it to you. And it's a difficult job to do. I've always said it's the most difficult job in the garage, but I've been shot down a few times in flames for saying that. But there you go. That's my opinion. I have done it, so I can speak from experience as well.
Yeah, no, it's very true. The distress purchase, when you look at people fixing, repairing, even maintaining cars, the maintenance element, I think there are a number of different spend categories, aren't there? If you look at the customer spending money, there's that positive spend in something pleasurable, like a holiday or something they're treating themselves. But even when you come down to, I suppose, service, repair and maintenance, there's the planned maintenance that I've maybe budgeted for that's coming up annually. So I'm having an MOT and a service. I planned for it. I've got the money. It's great. And then you've got the unplanned spend, which is actually catastrophic. So it's an unknown spend. It's not planned for. The car is also broken down and their element of freedom has now disappeared. And so the pressure's on about Billy and Millie getting to tennis and swimming and piano. And the car's stopped with an unknown value to repair it. And they're under time pressure. So, yeah, there's a storm of negativity surrounding that potential interaction with the garage, isn't there? And I guess the West End boy who you'd employed there would probably, there's a way of turning that and accepting and having empathy with the negative, but flipping it into the positive that, I suppose the money they're spending on rectifying that car is getting their freedom back. So you have to step away necessarily from seeing the single dimension of it's an exchange of cash for services. It's actually a restoring of your freedom, Mr. Customer, and making that car reliable once more. And I think, the proposition in terms of sales training that I've done, the proposition that you're making in exchange or consideration for the cash has to be framed in a way that everybody wins. You as a garage win commercially, the customer actually wins, although they don't see it. It's a positive improvement. What choices have you got other than walk or fix it? And I suppose in a way it's phrasing that in a way that's trying to see the positive in that. And that is a very different skill set because I'll give you an example. The example here is I go out to my car after a day's training and it doesn't start. I go, oh, how sad. Oh dear, never mind. I come back into the workshop and I go through the key bag and I see what else is either taxed, MOT'd, got fuel in it. And I grab another key and I go home and I go, that's interesting. I'll have a look at that tomorrow. But the impact on that is almost zero. It's just a bit, I've walked maybe 20 more meters to grab another key. Of course, a customer in that same situation, they left work and they get into the car and it doesn't start. The catastrophic impact of that, even perceived on the customer, is immense. Whereas as a technician, I'm sort of shrugging going, oh, that's a bit inconvenient. But, the customer's perspective, that's where I think if you've got a deep understanding of the trade, you don't maybe necessarily realize that how catastrophic that is and how that conversation maybe has to be managed. And I would, if we're going to vote, into the trade or out of the trade for service advisor role, I would vote that as a big negative of employing somebody that's over familiar and over technical versus somebody that, has got that empathy level with they would understand what that meant. If we're up voting and down voting for recruit from in the trade or out the trade, from within the trade, your negativity is that perception of the impact of that event, where somebody from out of the trade has direct empathy. So, that would be an upvote for you wouldn't have to coach that level of empathy externally, but you maybe would have to focus that on internally. And in a way, I think we're going to come to thinking about some of the points of the positives and negatives of where you're going to recruit your next service advisor for. But for instance, that would be something somebody unfamiliar would probably have higher levels of empathy for. So, a vote for somebody from externally, really. It sort of leads us on a little bit there, Jay, to what would you, we've talked about, that empathy, we've talked about maybe some level of sympathy, but what other aspects, in terms of key skills or core personal attributes, would you think that advisor role has to, if you go in, what must I have? I'm putting an advert in Indeed and somebody rocks up, what are the must-haves? What are the who wouldn't you, what would you, type of person would you invite in for an interview for things that you would be looking for?
Oh, who wouldn't I? Oh, how long have we got?
Who would? No. Who would?
So when you talk about putting an advert in, there's a couple of things I'd like to say about that. My personal experience was I haven't had an awful lot of luck from that. I personally used to prefer to search CVs if I could find people that way who were actively looking but in a role at the moment. And the reason for it, and I've tried different job titles because I believe it's down to the job title. We call it a service advisor, used to be a service receptionist or whatever. A service receptionist actually has an even different connotations when you put the advert up. And if you look at a lot of industry roles now, a lot of industries seem to employ a service advisor, and it is nothing like what we have in the automotive industry. The requirements of it are nothing like it because they all have, their systems have process, or a lot of them. Their systems have box ticking, so they're very often they're even looking at a screen on a phone saying, yes, you've said no to this, so therefore you've got to go to department D and I'll move you on. And that's their service process. And if it's a warranty issue with a technical part of let's just say a washing machine, there'll only be certain criteria that they can do for that warranty repair. So they see the job, and we're trying to up the wages of a service advisor within the industry, or at least hopefully most of the garages are. They're putting up this job for X amount of pounds. Somebody's seeing that advert and saying, oh, that looks a lot more than I'm being paid, because they're in a more sort of constrictive role that's paid at a lower pay scale. And they come for the job, and their ability for empathy, for team playing sometimes, because their job is just really, they're sat there on their own. Their ability to be able to manage a customer and a customer's expectations when exactly what you said about, Billy and Johnny have got to go to school and I haven't got a car. So where are you going to get me a car from? Well, we haven't got a car either. Well, it's your problem now because you've got my car that's broken and you can't fix it. And this is a situation that you end up at. And if you put a person like that in those roles, they're looking for, where is my yes no box? What do I do here? So as garage owners, we're sort of responsible for putting in a process, but to a point, but it's looking, as you said, for those core skills. So I generally looked for empathy. I looked at what they'd done in the past and how that could be transferable to the business. I really wasn't prescriptive. I'd like to have a long chat with them just to find out what kind of a person they are. But, if I was going to sit there and say, I need X, X and X, I'd probably miss an awful lot of people because they might have just been in the wrong role before. And I found that time and time again. So if we go back to the lighting industry guy, if you received a CV from him, I'd put money on it that most people would have said, what's he going to know and what's he going to give to this job? I was fortunate I actually knew him anyway, so it was I knew he was going to be good. But the point here is that most people would never have even looked at his CV. So but when you actually think about how good he could be because he knew how to talk to people, he knew how to quote, he knew how to do all those things, all you're doing is changing the detail of how he's doing it. You're not actually changing the sort of the process. He knows he has to speak to a customer, sell them how good you are, as in what kind of good service you do, and then he's got to deliver that through the team, get get the job back from the team and sell it back to the customer, even if there's something added onto it, and tell them why they need that extra job. He was doing that anyway. I'm sure a £5,000 lighting gig that somebody wanted put up probably never ended up at that price anyway. So, because things change once you get on site. So I think that's what we need to look at. We need to look at what they've done and be a bit more open-minded as to how the skills actually transfer to what we need. With regard to Indeed, like I said, I did CV searches. I did put adverts up. I didn't have an awful lot of joy with it because I was a service advisor role. I would be absolutely inundated. I think the last one I advertised for, in 2 weeks, I had 142 applicants. In the motor trade, I think that's inundated. And there'll be people listening to this saying, how on earth did you get so many? But with the description of service advisor, and that's when I realised what the mistake was. Because when you actually looked at what they were doing, I don't think they were, without an awful lot of training and an awful lot of personality changing, I don't think that it would have been possible to put them in that role. And I'm not sure how long they would have lasted, because I don't think it was what they were expecting either, if I'm honest. Because let's be fair, most people outside the industry don't really know what a service advisor role's like in this trade, and they don't know, how much multitasking you've got to do as well. And also the one thing I haven't mentioned yet, which I always look for, is somebody just being calm under that little bit of pressure. I say a little bit of pressure, but when you've got the technician, who said he'd have it ready in half an hour and it's not, and you've told the customer to come in, and you're like, oh, here we go, and they can be in the workshop saying, can we just get the car ready? And they can be in front of the customer and they're like a duck on water, it's and it's just really nice when you see that in them. But there's very few people who can do it, and it's those kind of attributes. How you determine those, I can only ever determine them by talking to people and getting them to give me examples of what they've done in the past. And if they can't come up with them, then they haven't been there, and you're not quite sure whether they can do it or not.
Yeah, and it's a very valid point there, Jay, that the non-industry anticipation from that, and that probably comes a little bit down to an accurate description of the job role. Does a garage owner or manager actually know what to describe the job as? So if you take the label of service advisor, and as you said, that can go across an industry, and you can pick somebody that's working in a call center that's running scripts and clicks and has essentially got, he's got 3 sentences worth, and if it doesn't tick all the boxes, you say, it shifts on. The service advisor role here really is the garage, it is the sole customer focus and facing role, and you have to be able to take it's a mini soap opera. I often think of the customer interaction as there's a drama that's unfolded with the car owner, and they're coming, and you're now involved in that episode in one way, shape or form, in anything that's car centric. And managing, as you said, you've alluded to there, that the service advisor has to, in terms of attributes, be customer relationship. So get on side with the customer in terms of that empathy. I understand from their position, but forcefully but gently remind them of your position as a service provider. Timelines are one of those things that never match, because, as you said, the customer has broken down immediately today now, and can I have it back by actually, can you do it while I wait? And so managing those expectation levels in that way, without, saying no without annoying people, and giving them those reasons and understanding why no. In the olden days, customer services training used to say the customer is always right. The perception of the customer is probably that they're always right. And it's the service advisor's job to tiptoe along that fracture in the ice between getting the customer raging and having them on side. So, that whole skill of managing the customer is immense. And I can see, if you were looking through Indeed and you're annoyed with your job in a call center, you go service advisor, garage, near me, answering telephone calls, great, booking jobs in, lovely. And I'm thinking about some of the service advisor roles I've looked through, and quoting for work. I can do that. How hard can that be? It's very easy to get a mismatch, and bombarded with 140 applications. Is there a better way of I suppose, how would you phrase it in a way that you don't want applications from people that aren't going to be suitable, because it's wasting your time, it's wasting their time. So I guess how does the industry start to think about describing this role in a way that would get people to really think that actually that's not for me, I haven't got those skills?
I think it's difficult unless we actually change the name. You can I did start to reword the adverts with specific roles in, but like you say, when you actually give them headers, people are looking at it thinking, yeah, I can do that. Some of the would be an advantage, having maybe done the role before or whatever, makes people think, oh yeah, I've never done that before, so I'm not really sure whether I'm going to be suitable. But as I said, if you keep going down that route, you'll almost get the wrong person. So it's just a matter of really sifting through it. A lot of service advisor roles, and I was probably unfortunate, shall we say, because of geographically where I am in the country. And for anyone listening, the garage was sort of near Heathrow-ish. So what you found was on that M4 corridor, there's endless call centres. And they're given the roles. And if you look through Indeed and you put in a postcode there and you put in the word service advisor, you will have pages and pages and pages and pages of jobs. So they're constantly looking to change because they don't like the job they're in. And I get that, and it's no fault of theirs. And a lot of those applicants are literally just service advisor, click, send, and that's what they're doing. And Indeed almost has to change. It won't, because it's run as a money-making organisation. But it's allowing that process to happen almost. And I know there are ways that you can try and field some of that within Indeed, but you still end up with this bombardment of applicants. And they're not, some of them, you can filter through, and some of them you can tell they're not even sure what they're applying for. And then the ones who have actually bothered to read to the bottom of the advert, because I did actually start putting in codes or even sentences at the bottom that they had to reply with at the bottom of the advert. And if they didn't do that, then I knew they hadn't read the advert anyway. So therefore, it was a big no for me. Yeah. It's a little bit unfair, I get that, but it was a question of, do you actually want to be a service advisor in the motor industry? Because unless you've read the advert, then clearly maybe you don't. So, but it's an interesting process. How you get the right person to apply is a difficult one. It's almost on the other end of the scale, depending on where you are, from advertising for a technician, because there'll be people shouting now when I say this, that they'll put an ad up for a technician and there'll be silence for about, for I don't know how long, and they just won't get people apply. And it's definitely different, a different end of the scale, but we need the right people, and we do need service advisors. So many businesses are running without them, and yet they're such a key part to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes you wonder whether there is a nomenclature, whether the name is just wrong. So whether, or the description is slightly different. But I think you're right. There has to be some level of early level sifting, but it's about describing the job in a way that's reflective, that also, I suppose, can project the significance of the role, because you are multitasking to the max. Customer conflicts, internal conflicts. If you think, I'm thinking some of the skills, influencing without direct authority. So how do you keep your workshop team on side, or the parts provider, liaising with suppliers, constructing complex quotations with an excellent level of detail. There's some things in there which are pretty heavy duty when you think about how do you get that across in that recruitment. And I think that's probably that in itself is probably a discussion for another day. But focusing back on that key role, there are some pretty meaty things to attract the right sort of talent. But that also reflects, I suppose, if you find somebody, as you were lucky to, that's got some of those personal attributes that, thinking clearly under pressure, I think, is a lovely phrase, that when the pressure ramps up a few notches, people don't just melt down. That probably has to be almost a must-have, because even if you've got great detail and some level of knowledge and can relate, if you crumble under pressure, that probably is going to make all of your other attributes fade slightly. So, probably I would give that an upvote to being, up the list. Must be able to manage, and not under stress and pressure, but just the volume of the frequency and the rapidity of a changing landscape. You have to be able to cope with that. So, and I know, there are probably specific character traits that could be described better than me in that, but I probably think that that's one of those. In terms of having somebody like that, then Jay, when you've got somebody that can do that, what sort of issues does a garage owner manager face then in terms of integrating somebody that's maybe not from the industry that has got those customer service skills and can think about it? Where do we buff up against then, I suppose, if you said the interface of the motor trade versus somebody that came from a customer service focus that clearly can think under pressure and can do the customer liaison and is not freaking out too much about presenting large bills and justifying positively the benefit of that service? What other challenges exist in the integration then, Jay, would you consider?
What I've seen and I'll be honest with you, what I've experienced, because I made some of those mistakes, were just, so they get this person in, this person they can answer phones, they can run diaries, they can do all those kind of things. So what I'll do today on day one is I'll give you an overview of the system, and then I'm going to go and fix the car. And you'll be fine. And you'll pick it up as you go along. Coupled with that, the garage then has no process. And I'm not suggesting this is any garage, because there are some, we all know this, James, there are some cracking garages out there. But generally, there are a lot of garages with no actual process. There's a spoken process, but there's no written process. So this new person comes in, and especially if you get somebody from a corporate, they'll be thinking, where's the process? Now, it's not a box tick process, but okay, so the customer comes in and, if we think about this logically, the customer comes in and gives me the keys, and I fill out the job card. What do I do then? And you can talk them through it, and I understand that, but there is no written process. The technicians don't have a written process. And generally what happens, so the problems lie with one, learning the technical the technical aspects of it, which can be taught as in an outline of the car, and what bit goes where, and and they can rely on their technicians to a point. But you want to try and teach them this without them relying too much on the technicians, because you're just dragging them away and they become inefficient then. You're dealing with this, but also there is no process. And when the technicians don't have a process, then the problem arises in the middle, where the business owner is constantly coming back to put the process right that he or she has never told anyone. So it's not necessarily about the person, and the amount of times that I've heard, the guy's been here a month and he's useless. And you think, is he? He might be, but he might just have no idea of what he's supposed to be doing at the moment, because he's never been in a service advisor role, or she, let's call this straight here. So, a couple of the really good ones that I trained a long time ago in a dealer were women, and they turned out to be fantastic service advisors. Some of the best. So, it doesn't matter who you've got or what background they've come from, if you think that they're right, but without process, without some level of technical training, which is going to help. Because if you think how many times, and the garage owners here will know this, you especially the ones that do a lot of diag, and you can tell I'm talking from experience. That was me. You're lying in a footwell, you've got multimeter wires around your head, and you're trying to get to that pin, and then somebody's constantly saying to you, can I just have a minute to know whether this part goes with this part, or I'm doing a water pump quote, and I just need to know whether this, and it's just like, can you just leave it to the end of the day? And then of course all your quotes and your estimates slip, and other garages have already quoted it, and other garages have already won the work, and you've lost out on that, and so the problem snowballs. And what you find is, without general process as well within that job, without you getting a new starter in and being able to say, right, this is the process, spending time with them as well. I used to write myself out the diary for probably a couple of weeks minimum initially, just to say, right, I am around, and I would go and do some things, but I am around, and this is how this job works. It's really good if you've already got a service advisor who's very good at the job, and then you can bring another one in. If you're looking for two, then to cover holidays and sort of really remove you from the front end of the business, because at that point, one just learns off of the other. And then if one does leave, you've still got one that's good, and you can bring another one in to do the training. And it's actually that process. If you've got enough technicians, that process works really well. But without the process in the garage, I can't emphasize this enough. It just, nobody knows what they're doing. And then you have a team problem where the technicians are saying, well, it didn't happen because he didn't do that, and they're saying, well, it didn't happen because she didn't do that, and you're just stood there in the middle thinking, I was just lying in a footwell trying to get a multimeter on 2 pins, and I don't really know how all this happened. So it's not necessarily a lot of it does boil down to, in my view, it boils down to process and the expectancy that someone's just going to learn the role. When, if you're listening to this thinking, I'm a technician and I've ended up owning a garage, were you doing a timing belt on day 2? No, you weren't. And that's how I always think of it in my head,
Yeah. No, you raise a valid point there, Jay, that there is a distinct lack of processization of business procedures, and a lot of people don't have time to do it. So one of the reasons I hear when we talk about processes is, I don't have time to sit down and write the process. And we go, well, if you then look retrospectively at all the interruptions you'll have whilst you coach the process ad hocly as the problems come up in an unplanned manner, and see how that ruins your day, with the opposition to blanking out the diary and getting focused, I know which I would choose, having been in both situations. And we've been through a processization of the business here, and it is a little bit painful. But when you get in the groove, you go, there's an operating procedure for that. There is a manual for that. If you have a quick look through, you'll see where you are, and then you can pick it up. And in terms of coaching, that becomes your coaching manual. So just, watch me do this, follow through in the manual, and you'll see where we go. And even if you document the bulk of the process, you always get the exceptions. But what it turns out to be is, from constant firefighting to the odd tactical adjustment when the situation is a bit weird, and really, the incumbent is feeling confident that there is a process, that you know what you're doing. Because let's not be right, if you rocked into a job and you were told just get on with it, in terms of retention of that employee, they're going to go home on the first day and go, oh, it's a madhouse. They've got no idea what's going on, and everybody's just going bonkers. And even if they've got the other skills that you want, they've got empathy and they understand the customer service bit, and they're happy to present bills, they're going to go, I just can't work there, and they're going to bounce. They're just going to go, or if that's one situation, or alternatively, they're going to look at that and go, well, I'm going to try and stick this out and make it work. And all the time internally, the narrative is, this place is unprofessional and don't really know what they're doing. How are they still in business? And that can't be a positive internal message for a new employee that is absolutely key and critical to your business. So I think businesses are probably doing a disservice to themselves by not having that process in place, because it comes across as pretty shoddy, really.
What I've quite often found is that once you have a bit of a process, and believe me, I'm not saying that I always had processes, because I didn't. Most of them, for a good part of the time that I owned the garage, were all in my head. So I thought I had process. It's just when somebody didn't follow the process, I had to tell them that they were wrong, which was, didn't really go down that well, because they said, well, I didn't know there was a process. But yeah, it was in my head. But what you find is, when there is a written process and everybody's working to the same thing, you then find that the teams start improving the process between them. And it's a really great thing to see when you see the service advisor, so we used to have weekly meetings. They were only like 20 minutes, see how things had gone. And then the service advisor and the technician are saying to you, oh, well, we've changed this. Oh, have you? All right, well, I better change the process then. What are we doing now? And they go, we're doing this way because it works better. We've decided that this is a much faster process. And you give them the autonomy to do that, and pretty soon you become the process amender rather than the process, unless you can find a good reason why it shouldn't be done that way. And sometimes there are examples, but you do get to the point where you find that the service advisor, particularly again if it's one that with experience elsewhere, they bring things from other places. Just being able to to be able to change that dimension within the business, where it's not all down to me anymore. These guys realize what's going to work quicker, and they start doing it themselves. And I have to say, it even works. I think I mentioned before that I had one of my service advisors was a college leaver, and he actually grew into that role because he didn't know anything else really. He actually grew into that role and took different training in different ways. You didn't just have the technical aspect, but you also had the life skill aspect as well, because you're dealing with somebody that much younger. But then he started to write process, and he started to change process because he could see faster ways of doing things. So by giving them a bit of autonomy, but giving them guidance in the first place. It's when nobody has any guidance. And how many garages have we all seen that really just look like chaos? And exactly what you just said, James, it is chaos. And if you're coming in from another job, and I can see why some only last a few weeks, because they just think I really don't understand what's going on here, and how am I ever going to learn it? Because there is a lot to learn. There's an awful lot to learn, particularly technically wise. There's a lot to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there is, and I think probably that's one of the really powerful tips is if you think you've got a gap, or you've identified a need in your business that you think you need that sort of help from a service advisor, and you want maybe your existing team to improve. It's not about recruiting new people. If you've got a service advice team and it's not working, I think the diagnostic, if you're thinking of your business about where it's going wrong, is probably to anticipate or investigate the process. Is the consistency, and does the process work? And you've hit the nail on the head. People that are coming in as part as a team member, or existing team members, have got so much more to offer than just the narrow focus of their job, that if you give that empowerment factor to go, this is the process, but I don't think it's working that well. Can you, when you're running through it, consider some alterations or modifications, or what might work well? And here we take the reflection that this is the way I've always done it when it was me, and now there's not just me, it's you and you and you, and we've got slightly wider interaction. Think about how that could be improved. And what I definitely find is people are empowered in that I can change my work environment, I can make a positive difference to the way that things work, and generally it'll be better for me, the garage, my co-workers and the customers. And what's turned from being a problem to having a ropey process or no process, by empowering and enabling the team to work together, as you discussed there, all of a sudden they're solving the problem that is the biggest pain in your backside. And that takes a certain, I suppose, kind of leader, and there is an element of leadership in the garage to sort of facilitate that, and having that open-mindedness that you're employing people not to just be robots, to actually think about, business improvement and facilitating those. And so the meeting you've described there, Jay, the 20 minutes every week between the technical and the service advisor, because again, that can be a bit of a pinch point, can't it? If we accept processes are sort of not too bad, if we go, okay, so there are two camps within the garage, definitely. I don't know whether you call it back of house and front of house, or the technical team and the customer facing team, but there's an interface there that can be fractious because of, and I would venture to suggest it's a little bit of non-clarity in the responsibilities and the overlaps and respect for each other. I would cite, my own personal experience there. What tips or advice or experience have you got in that, customer front of house, back of house relationship, where there maybe has been an issue? What tends to cause the issues, and what can be done to try and solve some of those?
I'm not going to bleat on about process again, okay? Because that can cause an issue between the two. Sometimes the lack of technical knowledge annoys the workshop. The girl doesn't know what I'm talking about. I keep saying, but we sometimes forget that 1 minute we're calling it a lambda sensor, then we're calling it an O2 sensor, then we're calling it something else, and we're not really helping them. So I try to break down all of those barriers on giving technicians the process. Basically, this is what you do, and this is how you describe a job to the service advisor, and the service advisor then knows how to take that work and move that on. That was always the sort of what I was trying to do, I was trying to break down those barriers. A 20-minute meeting was an absolute gem. That was. It really made people sit down and talk to each other, and actually, sometimes just talk about things that went right or wrong in the week. Because when do we ever do that? And if you've got a team of 7 or 8 or 9, they might not all have heard everything that went on that week, and they don't know how we overcame the problem. My biggest bugbear about something you just said, not about you, not what you said, about what I've heard in the past, is productives and non-productives. Now, James will know this. People who are in the industry very recently probably haven't heard it so much because it doesn't get banded around as much anymore. And when you say the disparity between the workshop and the front of house, I much prefer technicians in front of house, that name. Because for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, quite a while ago, and there are still some garages, and I've heard them use it as productives and non-productives. And a non-productive is basically anyone who's not producing hours, so anyone who's not a technician, essentially. And certainly when I was a service advisor, I was listed as a non-productive, and I found it the most insulting name ever. Because if you took all of us non-productives out of the equation, well, the whole thing fell apart, really. And it just, it has to be a team effort. So even if the garage owner is actually making connotations of, well, the technicians make all the money. I've heard that as well. Not necessarily being called non-productives, but, the technicians have, they make all the money. And if you don't have happy customers and you don't have that link, then you're left with the garage owner doing it. And you just can't do everything. And certainly the only way you overcome that is by forming the team and actually getting the team to talk to each other. So the service advisor has to be a team player, like I said earlier on, but it's down to the owner to actually find ways of getting them together. You can have team days, and lots of people do that, go out karting or do whatever. But I found that just a little meeting every week that really works and tried to stop that problem. Because if you did have a problem in the week and you did hear some of these things going on about little arguments, you could actually, without it being a slanging match, you can actually raise those points and say, well, what went wrong and how can we get around it? I have to say, after 6 months of running them, they probably sorted most of those things out themselves, and I knew nothing of it. And I didn't just sit there with my head in my hands, like not listening. But I think most of the things got sorted out, just got sorted out, but on their own, by setting up that process whereby they're used to talking to each other. Because the process should have communication in it between those departments. And when there isn't, and nobody's sure who's supposed to be telling who what, it just becomes difficult, and everyone starts blaming each other. And I see it so many times. It's front of house and technicians can become this them and us situation, and it should never be like that. It should always be a team effort.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it sounds like then you've fostered or engendered that spirit of team. I often look at whichever business, and I've been involved with a few on to various different levels, but when the team members within the business see the product or the purpose of the business, or call it what you will, the mission statement about helping car owners maintain and repair their vehicles, involves a number of different aspects from the who's marketing the business. How did the customer even know you existed? Okay, that's somebody that's responsible for marketing. A non-productive has got your name out there. Okay, because without that, the phone is not ringing, and so the technicians will be stood around scratching things they scratch, wondering where the cars are. So okay, so production, that has to stem from somebody doing some marketing, and then you get the incoming call. So the non-productive will pick up the phone call and convert what's essentially a lead or an inquiry into a prospective job that there's a quotation that can be created for. So now you've taken your sales funnel and filled it with potential clients that the service of reception and advisor has to offer quotations on and win the business. And this is all before it gets anywhere near the place. And so many things have to be right before, if you flip into technician mode, then before a car rocks up with a problem that they need to apply their skills, knowledge and expertise and convert that from being broken to unbroken or unserviced to serviced. And it sounds like you've done a great job there when the team have got an appreciation of looking sideways. I think they call it silo mentality. When I was in the corporate, there was the silo mentality that the functional jobs only saw what their particular skill and expertise and where they touched the value added process was relevant, and they would almost poo-poo or not even have a vision about what elements other people contributed to. Essentially, it's all getting paid and the profit being generated and customers being happy and being, repeat businesses. So, yeah, I think I concur. It sounds like you've done a great job when they then, as a team, can have those conversations and appreciate each other. Again, I think that's missing in a lot of my understanding and my experience of garages when things don't go right. There is that them and us mentality. And I would say probably if we're going to flag things, process is number one. Number two has to be that relationship into team. So everyone has an appreciation of where they're adding value, and definitely productive and non-productive can be used in an accounting term, I guess. But when you can't class that as, I think I would find that grossly offensive as well, Jay, in that job. Yeah. So the team, building the team, and essentially, if you've got process and the team is functioning, as a manager or owner of the business, your involvement is scaled back to probably problem solving for exceptions. So instead of every single interaction being an exception, you can take that strategic view. We talk a lot about the E-Myth book, where you've got your mission and then your manager and then your strategist. If that team is functioning well, you can then scale back your hands-on coalface activity and think about strategy and go, okay, what's my mix of customers look like? Where are we going in terms of brand? What are we doing in terms of the market? Where are we driving this business? And you can lift above the tactical and get into the strategic. So having a great service advisor and team functioning well has got to be the aim, I suppose, for I'm going to say a non-dysfunctional repair facility.
I think the issues that the owner faces without getting that team working are the fact that they just end up being everywhere all the time, and you hear the stories all the time of, well, I can't go away because they won't do their job and that won't happen. And the danger that you face across the whole team, but particularly with front of house, is that if you're answering those questions all the time because there's no process and you've done no technical training with them and you've not got the team operating, you're always answering those questions, and they almost after a while stop to think for themselves. And that's not to say that
Great point.
You might want a situation where you're drawn out of the business completely, and that's obviously the ideal. But that we have to remember there's a lot of 4 or 5 staff businesses out there where the owner is a key player in it. But you need to be able to remove yourself from all those decisions every day. And the only way you can do that is by building that team and having, in my opinion, having somebody good at front of house. I'll give you an example. So I got to the stage, not always at the start, and it takes a while. And this is the other thing, you have to be persistent with the ongoing training and with actually reinforcing the process and also reinforcing maybe the technical knowledge, but also reversing the question to them. So every time they ask you a question, and they will when they're new, I had the situation where I would always say to them, if I knew they knew the answer this was, I would always say to them, so what do you think? They give me the answer, right, you don't need me then. And if the guys that used to work for me are listening now, they're probably going, I used to hate it when you did that, but it was just one of those, because eventually they stopped coming. But you just need to get to that point where you're removing yourself from that situation and actually get them to think for it. So then I got to the point where I'd have At the end of the day, if I was deep in a job and I'd finish that job and I'd go back to the office and I'd get, can I just have a word with you for a couple of minutes? These are the issues that I don't know the answer to, and it wouldn't be pages. It would literally be, what do you want me to tell them? Is this quote right? Because it's quite a detailed one, and maybe I haven't done one before, and you could. But 99% of the time they were right. But there might be one item that that they hadn't quite got right or whatever. But it would literally be maybe 10 minutes of my time rather than constant hours and hours of my time. It doesn't happen overnight, and the garages that have got those service advisors will be nodding now as well, because they know how difficult it is to do it. But once you get it there, it's a really good place to be, and the team just work really well together. Technicians are happier as well, and the customers are, because they've got organisation at the front end, and that takes some doing as well, with it being very well organised throughout the day and quite swish, because there's always going to be a spanner in the works, and if you're always trying to firefight, when the spanner comes in, all of a sudden, you don't know what to put out first, do you? But at least if you're not in that space to begin with, it's just like, oh well, yeah, this isn't great. It's not what I planned, but it's my one problem of the day rather than my 20th.
Yeah, it's some really good point there, Jay. So I think if I can paraphrase then, so you're empowering. So yeah, you're empowering them to make the decision and have that thought process. So you will have trained them, you will have coached them, they do know the answer. And in terms of reflecting the question back, you're getting them not to be, there's a lazy, system 1 and system 2 thinking. Most humans are quite lazy with their thinking. Can I find that easy? No. All right, let's ask someone. And so, there is that habit of, I'm empowering you. You know this. I've given you the training. You can go away and do it. And that way you'll find the answers yourself in the time that is correct, because that question will come up in a particular moment where I'm not available. You can answer that question. And it builds the confidence that they can do that. And that's ideal. If they're coming to you with the exceptions, then just here are the 4 things that I don't have in my gift. That's a training need. So they've identified a gap in their knowledge or in the process, which we as a business owner can choose to close with some training or with a refinement of the process. And, once you get to that stage, you're absolutely winning, because the exceptions are less frequent and the refinement process are small tweaks, and all of a sudden you're engineering out the things that they don't know until it becomes very narrow and specific, like you say, maybe with a technical detail, maybe with a quotation confirmation. Yeah, so that empowerment then is very important. But you've also hit on something else there, that if we looked at the non-trade incomer, the elephant in the room is the technical knowledge and understanding. And we sort of cited that a little bit as a friction point to the technician group and as a knowledge gap to the service reception function. And I suppose we've also got to say, how comfortable would we be in our jobs if we had a gaping gap in our knowledge and we felt potentially exposed with every conversation we were having? And be that on a customer level, to have that conversation, the customer's been to Google and they're coming with a complaint and they're coming with a statement that your service advisor cannot challenge because their knowledge is very loose. There is a balance of knowledge that has to be present, I suppose, that they can challenge those statements or have a phrase that says, great, thanks for doing that research for us. That might help us in our mission. The process here for those type of concerns is we need to have the vehicle for an inspection to evaluate what's going on. That they're comfortable in that they're not exposed, that they don't know the technical thing, but also secondarily that they have a process that is robust and that everyone knows. And I'm going to drop in there because what's just jumped to mind, in garages that don't have the process, the owner might overhear that and go, no, it's great, just bring it in and we'll have a quick look. And the process is now exploded. It's failed. It's been shortcut. It's dropped into a technician who's busy in a job and he's having a quick look at some horrendous intermittent problem that you don't stand a chance of finding because, there isn't a solid process. The service advisor's a little bit flaky with their technical knowledge and confidence and understanding. And the garage man then has put the cherry on the top by just cutting short all the processes and go, we'll just make an exception in this instance and, ruin the whole thing. So, So yeah, technical understandings is important. You raise a really good point. So what do you think the cost per hour is if your technician is training your service advisor to know technical things?
Oh well, yeah, that's it's colossal. You know, you can't be in that situation. I always did it myself, but again, it's not a great place to be. And there'll always be the little gaps where, you know, something new comes up and they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But it's, you know, it can be quite rare, and they do get there. Because let's be fair, most of what we're doing on a daily basis is the same to a point. So once they have an understanding of the car, then you know, you can hopefully get them to that point. But yeah, if you're relying on the technician, and I've seen garages actually having, well, in fact, I've seen it. So I've seen it from 2 points. One is their process is that the technician builds the quote, and if that's your business model, that's fine, because I know there's a lot of garages out there that still do this. And the technician then, you know, speaks to the customer, or maybe even just hands it to a service advisor and it's done. But I've also seen where the service advisor is so de-skilled that they're then dragging this technician in to do the quote and leaving the job that they're on. And this is when it's just becomes, it just becomes a whole can of worms that you should never have opened, when you could, if done a different way and spent a bit of time, you could have done that differently. And yeah, there is a process to training them and getting them up to speed technically, but it shouldn't be something that people are frightened of. And I know, again, I think we mentioned earlier, garage owners, the first thing they'll say is, if they don't know anything about a car, I don't want them on the premises. And sometimes it's the wrong way of looking at it. And of course, you know, we have a skills gap. We have a skills gap everywhere in this industry. And there's almost a. I certainly did it before. I've always had a service advisor, by the way, all the time that I had a business. But I certainly had that thought process of, could I just do it myself and save the money? And there's a lot of people in that situation, and making that jump is quite difficult. But they need to do it, because you wouldn't believe when it goes right how much time that actually frees up within that business. But having a technician do it, no. There probably is a suggestion that you could get a service advisor to, you know, maybe do some kind of overview of vehicles in the workshop, but it still slows the workshop down, and that's the problem. I've seen that done, but then you lose your service advisor as well for weeks on end, and you're relying on a technician to actually tell them all of this, and the technician really doesn't want to do it anyway, and it's a real difficult process. It's a real difficult place to be in when you're just looking for certain parts of that skill set to be filled, so they've got some idea of what everyone's talking about.
Yeah, really good point. So I think the technician maybe isn't best placed to understand what level of knowledge the service advisor actually needs, and they're likely to go too deep into too much stuff, and their efficiency is going to be dropping. So you're going to lose the service advisor and the technician. Their efficiencies are dropping. The training, the transfer of knowledge is not going to be of the highest quality, because the technician may not be trained in giving training, and their subject matter area may not be on point for what the service advisor needs. And the service advisor may not know what they need, and may be hungry for all this knowledge that's not really relevant. Yeah, and the flip side is, you made a really good point. You know, it probably comes to a point in their business's growth where they go, do I need another technician, or do I need a service advisor? And I venture to say that the service advisor role done well will enhance profitability of the business far in advance of maybe adding a productive, you know, person that's selling labor, which is generating that revenue to the bottom line, where you're increasing your output, but your profitability, your efficiency isn't great, because the things are being missed from the quotation, then they're being misquoted, or the process isn't being done correctly. And you could say, well, actually, there could be a rule or a guide that says, your next growth, your next growth aspect should be service advisor. And if you train them and coach them well, that will improve the efficiency of the business overall. That will lead to more business, to more of the right business, to more profitability, which will enable you then to add on a technician if you could find one, and the business can grow that way. And I guess if we were fixed, Jay, in terms of recruiting technicians, and your technician team is your technician team today, if you looked at that and said, well, how are we going to improve the business performance? It looks like a no-brainer to say, if you have a highly effective service advisor and that's a variable that you can influence, and your technical team producing the hours is fixed, you're only left with one option, aren't you? To improve that business, you have to make the business element of it, stronger. Unfortunately,
too many people see it as an unwanted cost, and that's something that, that's just not right for the way to actually get the business to move on. There's also an element of even businesses with service advisors. We all know about the ratio, James, the elusive ratio that everyone talks about of how many service advisors to how many technicians. And I've heard lots of different views on this, and I can only speak. I'm not saying it's the right way. I can only speak for my own experience of it. And for those of you that don't know, anyone listening, I had a specialist, so a lot of the things we were doing were slightly different. So I'll make a caveat there, because there are. I ran it with one service advisor to 3, and at the time I had. When I had 6 technicians, I had 2 service advisors. And to some people, they think that that's complete madness. And it was profitable. I can't say it wasn't. So, but there was just too much going on at the front end with some specialist things. And we were collecting cars and we were doing all those kind of things. And somebody has to do all that stuff. So for me, it's a 1 to 3, but I get if it's a more of a fast fit environment, you probably go to 1 to 4, 1 to 5 or something like that, because everything, especially if you're running a lot of menu price things. So although we did have that, there was an element of a lot of things just had to be built because they were different types of jobs. Customers also, when you're dealing with maybe jobs that are a little bit more in depth, you need a bit more of an explanation. We needed to spend a bit more time with them and all those kind of things. You get more inquiries based on specific faults with a car. So, but for me, it's 1 to 3, and I've seen very, very busy places running 1 to 5, 1 to 6 service advisors, and then wonder why they leave. And there's just too much going on. There's too much plate spinning, and it's too hard for them.
Yeah, is there a way of identifying that? The magic ratio is one of those to go. If the business is a semi-typical profile, 1 to 3, because what we've got to consider there's probably a couple of different factors that affect the workload of a service advisor. So. Do you have, going from what type of work are you doing? So if you're doing, as you say, menu pricing and regular service and maintenance on a fixed number of brands or a fixed scope of work, it becomes sort of, less complicated. Where if you're doing one-off jobs or more difficult stuff, the quotation, the invoice value is likely to be higher, the complexity is a bit steeper, and therefore the work to process each job is slightly higher. Whereas if you go down the sort of less customer volume but more profit per job, where you focus on looking at things like vehicle health checks, so the vehicle's in for a particular type of repair function, service inspection, that you're actually proactively searching for that work that needs doing to advise the customer respectively that they've got some maintenance items that will need doing in the next time around, but there are some critical urgent items that need doing now. Your volume of underlying work can generate more work with an excellent service advisor. So, it sort of depends a little bit on the business process and the approach, but, your service advisor, if they're overloaded, it's not a happy place. Their effectiveness starts to drop. By trying to save another wage, you're reducing the business profitability, and it becomes a false economy to overload a service advisor in a way, because they're not going to be effective or happy. Their customer relationships are going to suffer, and generally, poor service advisor gives your business a poor, because they're under pressure and stress, gives you the outward facing part of your business and the interaction, which is all important to the customer. Their journey and their feeling about your business is going to come across as poorly as well. I suppose it becomes tricky, Jay, when you don't have the magic ratio. So when you've got 4 technicians and you now have got 2 service advisors because one can't do 3, there is that perpetual, when is the right moment, to expand or to, what advice could you give? Would you, in those situations, would you rather run with a slightly heavier front end, service advice to the back end, or, what to do in that case of 4 technicians? Would you go to 2 service advisors and look to recruit?
Yeah, again, I'm probably going to get shot down here, but yes, I would. Yeah, I would. And I've done it. I've had less technicians and not more service advisors and technicians. I never managed that one, but yes, I have had a higher ratio, because you can make the business more efficient, especially when it's a team, because the service advisors help where they can. They really do try to. If they're not as, when I say not as busy, that's probably wrong, but when they've got more time to organise, the efficiency of loading the workshop goes up. If you've got a stressed service advisor, the efficiency doesn't go up. And also, if you've got a service advisor who doesn't know process or hasn't been trained in the right way, their day is almost organised the wrong way round, but they don't know it because they might have been taught that way, or they might have just assumed that's the way it's got to be. And so they're not thinking about when to do certain things during the day to actually speed up their day. So they're left at the end of the week or the end of the day with, some time and everything organised. You mentioned VHCs. Well, that's a classic example of adding something in. The garage owner thinks this is a brilliant idea, and I know for a fact, and I know that there are other garages out there that have said this, and it happened to me. My forward bookings went up by 30% with a VHC when I brought that in, and I actually used to, if you got really busy, you'd almost have to think, oh, are we going to still do them? Because I know what work it's going to, it potentially could bring in at the end of your diary, but it really helps the forward bookings. But what they lose sight of is that they've just loaded all this onto the service advisor, because the technicians are, the cars come in for an MOT, for instance, and it passed, a couple of advisories, and all of a sudden now it's got a VHC with a battery that needs doing. Well, that would never have been picked up on an MOT. Great news for the garage, but the service advisor's now got to fit that into their day. So, you have to think to yourself, you're going to introduce this stuff. Will that service advisor, and if you're on the 4 ratio, like you said, will that service advisor be able to take on that extra work? It's certainly conversations that I had. Are we going to be able to do that? But there are other things you can do by streamlining your business to actually maybe not do some of the service type work that you would normally do, or that you were doing before, to try and make your business more efficient. But as far as service advisors go, you've just got to be careful what you're lining up for them to do during the day. If I go back to how their day's organised, I'd just like to make one more point here, that I was probably in a fortunate position in that I did my apprenticeship, then I did some workshop control. I actually did service reception, then I did workshop control, then I was a supervisor of service reception, all within a dealer. So, albeit not doing that in an independent, I had experience of those jobs. And so organising a day almost was trained into me. And for the garage owners that haven't done it, and they let the service advisor learn it on their own, it's quite surprising when you sit there and see the order in which they're doing things. And it's not that it's wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just, it could be more efficient. we spend a lot of time looking at efficiency in a garage, even down to how many steps do we take going to get oil and water and all those things. Have we done that for a service advisor? I'm not saying about steps, but the order in which they do things during the day, and how organised can they be with raising estimates for customers and talking to customers and all those kind of things. And we've got some great garage management systems out there now that do all this automated stuff, but we might still not be utilising the people that we've got well, just by making them efficient. And although we've had efficient technicians, and we're working on more efficient technicians and more efficient work and everything else, actually working on more efficient service advisors might also give us the same amount of gain. And I think garage owners would be surprised how much gain they can make by a good service advisor, and almost having too many of them. And that sounds awful, but it's not just a question of, that's X amount of pounds out of the bottom line, because that's the way it's thought of a lot of the time, and it's not always out of the bottom line, is it? Because they might be selling more, but just on that as well. My last point on that is also, as an owner, think about, if I'm top heavy on service advisors, does that mean then that when one of them's away, I don't have to step in? And it does. Normally, it means that they can cope for a week on their own, and you don't have to, you can still keep the workshop running. If that's what you do, I don't know. Some people do different things, but there's an awful lot out there that have the setup like I had, where they were a technician, and it's, you have to think about that, because inevitably, when the service advisor's away, you end up doing it. That's generally what happens in a lot of garages.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, some really good points there, Jay. One of the things that sort of sprung to mind about that workloading with a highly efficient service advisor and implementing those vehicle health checks, you have to look at the volume of customer interactions where you're scaling down the number of jobs, because there's I think often people look at time slots, and you mentioned automated diaries. So for this particular job in the calendar, in the diary, it's worth this particular time slot. And in the analysis work I've done about failures in the process, you notice failures in your process because everything shifts to the right in the diary. And that's an indicator that you've got a malfunction, because things are now later, things are being missed, the deadlines. Everything, if you picture the diary in the way we write in the Western world from left to right, failures lead to everything shuffling right. And that's potentially a symptom, if we think about diagnosis, of is your volume of customer interaction outstripping the capacity to service them. That's going to lead to those failure modes. And you could say, in the situation where you've got highly effective service advisors, that your loading is slightly on the unambitious side, so there's a bit of slack in the system to cope with essentially the work that they're now finding, quoting for and winning, and the profitability in the business increases whilst the number of interactions either declines slightly or stays static, and that's the efficiency or the huge benefit to profitability that a well-trained, well-coached service advisor can bring to that business. So some really good points there. Jay, I'm sort of conscious we've been rattling on for a bit now, and I think we've raised some really, really interesting points. You brought to mind some things that I definitely not considered, and I'm hoping, as always, that we've got our dear listener who's maybe in this situation thinking about some of the situations that we've talked about, maybe to identify some of the issues that they've got, and there's definitely some key factors that they can think about maybe doing that analysis. But if you had to sum it up, if you were going to give the advice, so our dear listeners caught the last 5 minutes of this, if you could summarize maybe 2 or 3 things that you would advise a garage that's maybe under a bit of pressure, that's maybe not bought in 100% to service advisors, or it's not quite working out, what would you think things that they could look at, a couple of 3 things that you would advise them to go away now, tomorrow, and start to look at? What would they be, Jay?
I'd definitely look at if you've already got a service advisor and it's not quite working, I'd look at the team, I'd look at the process, definitely, and also their scale of knowledge, but you'll find the scale of knowledge technically, because are they dragging you into the job too much? You need to try and consider that. I used to get a bit of paper and actually write down what are the things that actually bother me not bother me, but what are the things that are slowing me down during my day, and then try and rectify them one at a time. And it might be someone's just constantly asking you questions, and we'll try and deal with that. If you haven't got a service advisor, then seriously look at it and find out whether you can tweak your labour rate to afford one to actually stop you having to deal with those people, those customers all the time, and those questions, because you're being torn from technician to service advisor and backwards and forwards. And I think definitely do that. And obviously, if you do have a service advisor and their technical training is lacking, then find a way of actually bridging that gap, I suppose, whether however that may be, because they don't always learn it from a technician, and they might not always learn it correctly from that technician. It just depends what kind of technicians you've got, really. But definitely look at the team and the process, because if the team isn't working, you'll end up losing staff anyway, and that's a big problem for our whole industry at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one thing that struck to mind there when you were going to say that, I did the thing here about a check count. How many times am I interrupted with a question, and then looking at the question detail and going, I've got a process issue, I've got a knowledge issue. Identifying the root cause of the interruption gives you the diagnosis. Really, it's your data that's giving you a diagnosis of what's not working. So that's really awesome. One thing that sprung to mind when you mentioned that about maybe a smaller business that's thinking about their investment, I think often when I speak to smaller manager owners, they look at this annual salary and they think, based on my current operation, I can't afford it. And often they lose the sight of actually that person is going to contribute extra revenue and profit, more importantly, to the business, and they should easily be able to cover their costs. So what they've actually looking at is, can I pay the weekly or monthly salary for a period? Maybe that's 2 or 3 months till they become effective. And instead of having to find 30 or 40, whichever your number is for a top class service advisor, I've got to find that based on today's business. It's, I think, having a little bit of foresight to saying, I've got to find a couple of months' salary while they become highly effective, and the business improvement will take care of their wages and derive additional profit on the bottom line. And I think as a smaller, owner manager, that's sometimes really difficult when to have the confidence to say that that's going to enable my business to grow. And I often look at that in sight of, they're going to spend 1,500, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 quid on an aircon machine or on a diagnostic machine. And they think about that as a very limited, my exposure to that investment is limited. Whereas if you took that money and invested that in the potential salary, if you call it a latent improvement zone, where you have to fund that while the business doesn't churn round, that's actually a much wiser investment than it would be on something new, shiny with flashy lights that business owners and particularly technical people are fine with investing in. So, as you were saying that, I was thinking those conversations.
Yeah, I think just on that, we have to remember that the customer, and you mentioned it earlier, James, they take the car away and it really looks no different. Some garages valet the cars, so great, it got washed. But as far as that's concerned, unless you've got a broken window or a broken light or bold tyres, you don't really see any difference, and most customers don't even really notice the bold tyres. Let's all be honest. But if you're spending money on your front of house, then that's what they do see, and that's the image of the business, and we also have to remember that. So even if you do have to tweak prices a bit to try and make that more palatable, just remember that the experience that the customer is going to get is going to be that much better. It's going to seem that much better to the customer than people, trying to run around and make everything happen. It's going to seem a lot smoother and a lot more efficient. And people like efficiency. They like to come into a business and see that it's working. So that's also another thing to think about. And that just pushes into the way the business is marketed, isn't it? To the customer, it seems like it is a more efficient place to go, and they're just telling other people, you go there, they just it's on the money every time. It's efficient, and service advisors, definitely good ones, definitely make it efficient.
Yeah, no, really good point. Really good point. So, your customer has gone from, walking through the garage door to find Fred, who's the mechanic and the receptionist, to, turning up into not a grand office, but into a space where they're dealt with professionally by a reception, somebody with reception skills that takes their inquiry, that can manage that process, that can also phone them back and just care for them through the interaction. I think the perception, the value that adds to the perceived value of the invoice for the customer is often missed by smaller businesses and owner managers that go, I can just do it, when they think they're saving a wage. Yeah, you're right. I think we had a conversation earlier actually about when you get it right, your customers that you don't necessarily want, the price conscious ones, will turn up to your business and know they're in the wrong place. Because this isn't, this is not what this is not right for me. You're obviously much better than my budget allows for, in a way, which gets us driving towards those A-type customers that really revel in a great customer experience, and they see the value in what you do. They're not price conscious. They're much more value, and that's what your service advisor will do. Really drive home that value when they're quoting, aren't they? When they're converting estimates, when the pickup and the handover happens, driving value and quality into that relationship, retaining the customers and making the customer feel happy about having spent the money. Whereas, a rush technician that's in between jobs that flings a piece of A4 paper and gets a credit card machine, all that value proposition has disappeared, isn't it? It's a bit, bit inconvenient. So some really good points there. Jay, look, we've come to the end of our time here, and I really appreciate your time, your wisdom, and your thoughts there. You've raised some amazing points, and some points I hope our dear listener will look from, maybe can take some inspiration from, and maybe can change their own situation. So from me and from my dear listener, I thank you dearly for giving up your time and appearing.
No problem at all, James. It's been great. Thanks for the chat. It's always nice to talk about service advisors. I could talk for days on it, to be honest. It's a bit of a passion of mine. Even though I'm a technician, I'm a technician. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And that shone through, Jay. That really did. So, once again, thanks ever so much for appearing on, and we'll see you real soon.
Yeah, thanks, James.